There are a few graphic and distressing details that will be revealed at the end of this story. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. But before we get into today's chilling narrative, if you're a fan of the strange, the dark, and the mysterious, all delivered in a carefully crafted story format, then you're in the right place. That's exactly what we do here, and we upload 3 or 4 times every single week. So, if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, don't just hit the like button. Replace its eye drops with Egyptian fox urine. And of course, make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you never miss a single upload. Alright, let's get into today's story. On the cold morning of February 2nd, 2012, the city of Anchorage, Alaska, was coated in a thick blanket of snow. The air was so frigid that it seemed to burn the lungs with every inhale, and vehicles moved cautiously along the icy roads. At around 7 a.m., a young man drove off a busy 4-lane highway into a large snowy parking lot. His car crunched against the frozen ground as he carefully maneuvered past dozens of parked vehicles, their windshields frosted over from the night before. He finally came to a stop in front of a small shack, painted in a bright teal color that stood out sharply against the monotone white of the surrounding landscape. This was Common Grounds Coffee, a cozy and very popular kiosk-style coffee shop that locals adored. The young man worked here as a barista. This shack wasn't just his place of employment. It was part of his daily rhythm, almost like a second home. He shut off his car, pulled his jacket tighter against the icy wind, and trudged up to the side of the building where the white employee door was located. Fishing into his pocket, he pulled out his key to unlock it. But as he slid the key in and twisted, he realized something strange. The door was already unlocked. That immediately gave him pause. Normally, the closing barista was responsible for locking up after a shift. And he knew exactly who had worked the closing shift the previous night, 18-year-old Samantha Koenig. Samantha had only been working at Common Grounds for about a month. But despite her short tenure, she had proven herself to be dependable, cheerful, and meticulous. She was not the type of employee to forget such a basic responsibility. The young man furrowed his brow. Maybe Samantha had simply made a mistake. After all, everyone slips up occasionally. He shrugged off his unease and pushed open the door. The instant he stepped inside, however, the young barista noticed something that didn't sit right. The kiosk felt wrong. Normally, Samantha kept her workspace tidy. She wiped down counters, stacked cups, and put everything in its proper place before locking up. But this morning, the place looked as though someone had left in a rush. Napkins were scattered on the ground, towels were carelessly draped across surfaces, and cups were still sitting out as though drinks had been abandoned mid-preparation. The barista's unease grew heavier. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe Samantha had gotten distracted. Maybe something urgent had come up. But the mess didn't look accidental. It looked abrupt, like she had suddenly vanished. He made his way to the cash register, still running through possible explanations in his mind. Maybe she wasn't feeling well. Maybe a family emergency had called her away. But when he reached for the register key, slid it in, and turned the lock, his stomach dropped. Just like the front door, the register was already unlocked. He pulled open the drawer. It was empty. All the money was gone. The realization hit him like a blow. The shop had been robbed. His heart began to race. He quickly pulled out his phone and called his boss to report what he had found. The night before February 1st had been bitterly cold in Anchorage. The kind of night where the frost painted elaborate patterns across windows and the streets emptied early as people hurried home to warmth. At around 8:30 p.m., Samantha's boyfriend, Dwayne, pulled his truck into the parking lot of Common Grounds. He was about half an hour late. He had been held up at work, and he knew Samantha had been expecting him to pick her up promptly after her shift ended at 8 o'clock. As he rolled up, the first thing he noticed was how quiet the lot was. Snow crunched under his boots as he stepped out into the freezing night air. The coffee shop was dark. Its cheerful teal shack looked lifeless, its windows black, as though it had been closed for hours. Confused, Dwayne walked up to the kiosk window and pressed his face against the icy glass, cupping his hands to block the reflection. Inside, it was empty. No Samantha. No light. No signs of anyone. Immediately, his mind drifted back to the argument they had had earlier that evening. Over text messages, Samantha had accused him of cheating. The fight had escalated quickly, with hurtful words thrown back and forth, ending with Samantha upset and Dwayne responding with cold indifference. As he stood outside the dark coffee shack, guilt gnawed at him. Maybe she hadn't wanted to see him after the fight. Maybe she had caught a ride home with her father or a friend instead. That would explain why she wasn't here waiting for him. Trying to convince himself of this, Dwayne climbed back into his truck. He pulled out his phone and sent Samantha a message asking if she was okay, if she had gotten home. Then he waited. Minutes passed. The cold outside seemed to creep into his bones, though he sat inside the cab. No response. Despite their argument, Dwayne still cared deeply for Samantha. Concern overpowered his pride. He decided to drive straight to her house to make sure she was safe. A few minutes later, Dwayne pulled up to Samantha's home. It was a modest house where she lived with her father, James Koenig, who had been raising her alone since she was 2 years old. Dwayne walked up to the door and knocked. After a moment, James answered, looking tired but alert. "Hey," Dwayne began, his voice clouded with unease. "I just came from Common Grounds. Samantha wasn't there after her shift. I thought maybe she was here." James frowned. "She's not home. I haven't heard from her all night." The two men exchanged a heavy glance. Something wasn't right. They went inside and sat down in the kitchen, phones in hand, both of them frantically calling and texting Samantha. For long minutes, there was nothing. Then suddenly, Dwayne's phone lit up. A text message from Samantha's phone. He opened it quickly. The message was curt and unusually formal. Samantha wrote that she needed some time to think, that she was upset, and that she'd be staying with friends for a couple of days. She asked Dwayne to let her father know. Dwayne exhaled in relief and showed the text to James. But James stared at the screen, deeply unsettled. "This doesn't sound like her," James said firmly. As her father, he knew Samantha's patterns. She confided in him about nearly everything. For her to vanish without a word, to avoid his calls, and to ask someone else to relay a message to him, it didn't fit her at all. Both men sat at the kitchen table late into the night, waiting, hoping for more messages. But none came. By morning, James couldn't shake the dread tightening in his chest. He drove to the Anchorage Police Department and filed a missing person report for his only daughter. When James Koenig walked into the Anchorage Police Department on the morning of February 2nd, he carried more than a father's concern. He carried the weight of certainty that something was very wrong with his daughter's sudden disappearance. The officer on duty took his statement patiently, noting every detail James provided. Samantha's last known whereabouts, the odd text message, and her unusual silence. James explained how close they were, how Samantha always told him where she was going, even for the smallest things. She wasn't the type to vanish without a trace. The officer promised to file the report and open an inquiry, but James could sense the hesitation. Missing person cases often began with the assumption that the individual had left on their own accord. Runaway, fight with a boyfriend, a teenage need for space. But James was adamant, this was not Samantha. By that same afternoon, officers reached out to the owner of Common Grounds Coffee. She confirmed that something odd had happened. That very morning, her barista had called in, alarmed to find the kiosk unlocked, the register emptied, and Samantha nowhere to be found. It looked like a robbery. The owner assured the police that she had access to the kiosk security footage from the previous night. She would review it and send a copy to investigators immediately. While waiting for the footage, detectives began the basic groundwork of any missing person case, calling Samantha's friends, classmates, and relatives. They hoped to find someone who had spoken to her, someone who could confirm where she had gone after work. But call after call came back empty. Nobody had heard from her. Nobody knew where she was. Meanwhile, a team of officers drove out to the Teal Coffee Shack themselves. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they surveyed the quiet lot. The kiosk looked unremarkable, just a lonely structure standing against the vast white of Anchorage's winter landscape. Inside, they found no immediate signs of struggle. No overturned chairs, no shattered glass, no blood. Everything seemed eerily still, as though Samantha had simply vanished into thin air. One detail, however, did stand out. Beneath the counter, hidden from customer view, was a panic button. A simple press would have triggered an alarm, instantly alerting authorities. It hadn't been pressed. This fact weighed heavily on the officers. If Samantha had truly been in danger, why hadn't she pressed it? Did she not have the chance? Or was she even in danger at all? Theories began to form. Perhaps Samantha herself had staged the robbery, taken the money, and walked away. The messy kiosk, the unlocked register, the disappearance. It could all point to her willingly leaving. But that theory had one glaring hole: transportation. Samantha hadn't had a car that night. Walking away wasn't plausible. The temperatures were far below freezing, and Anchorage wasn't a city designed for pedestrians in the dead of winter. If she had left, someone must have taken her. Later that day, the owner of Common Grounds delivered the surveillance footage to the police. Officers huddled around a monitor as the grainy black and white video flickered to life. It was 8 p.m., February 1st, the night Samantha vanished. The footage showed Samantha inside the kiosk. She was alone, moving about with her usual energy, preparing drinks, tidying, smiling occasionally at customers. Her youthful spirit shone even through the low resolution of the video. Then, around 8:05, something shifted. A figure appeared just outside the camera's range, at the service window. Though the camera couldn't capture their face, Samantha clearly acknowledged their presence. She turned, took an order, and began making a drink. She handed the finished drink toward the figure. And then, her demeanor changed completely. Samantha abruptly stepped back, her arms shooting up into the air in a clear gesture of fear and surrender. Seconds later, she reached over and flicked off the lights inside the kiosk. The screen went darker, but still faintly visible was Samantha kneeling down on the floor, her back to the window. For a full minute, she remained frozen, unmoving, unresisting. Then, slowly, she stood and walked toward the cash register. She opened it, scooped out money, and returned to the window. She extended her hands as though passing the money to someone outside. A shadowy figure leaned closer, reaching into the frame. Moments later, Samantha kneeled again, back to the window. 2 minutes passed in tense silence. Then the figure made a bold move. He leaned his upper body fully into the kiosk, reaching down as if tying Samantha's hands. The footage was grainy, the angles poor, but it was clear this was a male. He wore a large sweatshirt, a hat pulled low over his head. After securing her hands, the man slipped completely through the window into the kiosk. He moved with chilling efficiency. He stood Samantha up, pressed something, likely a gun, into her back, and marched her out the employee door. The camera caught one final image. The man leading Samantha across the snowy lot toward a white pickup truck. He opened the door, pushed her inside, and drove away. Then the screen went black. The footage left investigators shaken. It was proof. Samantha had not left willingly. She had been abducted. But beyond that, the video offered little. The suspect's identity was hidden in shadows, his features obscured. Days passed with no leads. Anchorage police were joined by the FBI, who quickly recognized the potential severity of the case. Together, they worked around the clock, analyzing the footage, canvassing neighborhoods, and reviewing hundreds of tips. Meanwhile, James Koenig refused to sit idle. The desperate father rallied the Anchorage community, urging them to help search for Samantha. He appeared on local television, pleading for his daughter's safe return. His anguish resonated deeply. Soon, Samantha's story spread beyond Alaska. National news outlets picked it up, broadcasting her face across the country. Strangers donated thousands of dollars to fund a reward for any information that could lead to her rescue. Flyers plastered the city. Search parties combed through snow-covered parks and abandoned lots. But despite the growing attention and mounting reward, no one came forward with useful information. Leads fizzled. Days stretched into weeks. And Samantha's silence continued. Then, on February 24th, 3 agonizing weeks after Samantha disappeared, Dwayne received a text message from Samantha's phone. It was brief but specific. The message instructed him to go to a public park in Anchorage, to look at a particular sign along the main trail. Dwayne and James immediately alerted police, but their desperation overwhelmed caution. Before officers could arrive, the 2 men rushed to the park themselves, snow crunching beneath their hurried steps. They reached the sign, a simple wooden bulletin board. Pinned to it with a thumbtack was a clear plastic Ziploc bag. Inside was a single piece of paper, neatly typed. It was a ransom note. But what chilled them to the core was the image attached. The note had a photocopy taped to it, a picture of Samantha. In the photograph, Samantha looked dazed, her eyes unfocused, her expression blank. She wasn't looking directly at the camera, but slightly off to the side. Beside her, a man's hand held up a copy of the Anchorage Daily News, dated February 13, 2012. It was a proof-of-life photo. For James, the sight was both horrifying and oddly relieving. His daughter was alive, at least as of February 13th, over a week earlier. The ransom note demanded $30,000 to be deposited into Samantha's bank account immediately. If the money was delivered, the note promised, Samantha would be released. James, guided by the FBI's instructions, deposited a portion of the ransom money. Then agents set up surveillance, waiting for the moment the account was accessed. For days, the account remained untouched. The waiting was torture. Every hour felt like a gamble on Samantha's life. Finally, on February 29th, the first withdrawal occurred, right in Anchorage. FBI teams rushed to the ATM location, but by the time they arrived, the suspect was gone. 2 more withdrawals followed at different ATMs across the city. Each time, agents barely missed him. Surveillance footage revealed the same frustrating image: a man in a ski mask and large sunglasses, concealing his face. Then silence again. The account went dormant for over a week. But on March 7th, activity resumed, this time far from Anchorage. Withdrawals were made in Arizona, then New Mexico, and finally Texas. The FBI scrambled to coordinate with local authorities. At one Texas ATM, surveillance footage captured not only the masked suspect, but also the vehicle he entered afterward, a white Ford Focus. The car's direction of travel was noted, east, along a Texas highway. A statewide alert was issued. On March 13th, a Texas Highway Patrol officer spotted the white Ford Focus parked outside a small roadside hotel. The officer parked discreetly nearby, waiting. Minutes later, a man in his 30s exited one of the rooms, walked calmly across the lot, and climbed into the Focus. The officer tailed him, radar gun at the ready, until he caught the driver committing a minor infraction. 2 miles per hour over the speed limit. It was enough. He flipped on his lights. The car pulled over without resistance. The driver rolled down his window, his expression unnervingly calm. "License and registration," the patrolman requested. The man handed over an Alaskan driver's license. Name: Israel Keys. Age: 34. Address: Anchorage, Alaska. Backup arrived swiftly. Officers searched the vehicle. In the trunk, they found a ski mask, sunglasses, clothing that matched the ATM footage, a handgun, Samantha's cell phone, and her debit card. Keys was arrested on the spot. At first, Israel Keys denied everything. But as evidence piled against him, his facade cracked. Finally, he agreed to tell investigators what had really happened to Samantha, on one condition. He wanted an Americano coffee, a peanut butter Snickers, and a cigar. Only after receiving these items did he begin to talk. What he revealed was darker and more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Israel Keys didn't look like a monster when investigators first saw him in the interrogation room. He didn't fit the image that television and movies had taught them to expect of a kidnapper. He wasn't foaming at the mouth, he wasn't trembling with rage, and he wasn't pleading for mercy. Instead, he sat comfortably in the chair, legs slightly apart, arms resting loosely on the table, like a man waiting for a casual business meeting. When the coffee, the peanut butter Snickers, and the cigar were brought to him, he smiled faintly, as though he were a guest being treated with courtesy. It was only once he had these comforts before him that he leaned forward and began to speak. "Let's start with Samantha," one of the agents said. Keys tilted his head, eyes flicking to the coffee before returning to the agents. "Samantha," he repeated, almost savoring the name. "You've been chasing shadows. Let me tell you how it really happened." According to Keys, the plan had not been rushed. He didn't stumble across Samantha Koenig by accident. He had been watching the coffee kiosk for weeks, studying its layout, the routines of its workers, and the blind spots in its security. "I liked that spot," he admitted. "It was isolated, small, and easy to control. Only one worker at a time. That's what I needed." On the night of February 1st, he approached the kiosk wearing a ski mask and carrying a gun. He ordered a drink casually at first, giving Samantha no reason to panic. But when she handed him the cup, he showed her the weapon. She froze. "Most of them do," he said, almost academically. Then I told her exactly what to do. "Lights off, get on the floor." She followed my instructions perfectly. He tied her wrists with zip ties, crawled halfway through the window, and forced her to hand over the cash from the register. But he wasn't there for money. "Money was just a cover," he admitted. "I already had plenty stashed away. What I wanted was her." Keys marched Samantha out of the kiosk at gunpoint and into his white pickup truck. He placed her on the passenger side, ordered her not to move, and drove into the night. Investigators leaned in closer as Keys described what came next. He claimed that during the drive, Samantha pleaded for her life. She told him about her boyfriend, her father, her dreams for the future. "I told her this was just a kidnapping for ransom," Keys said. "That if her family cooperated, she'd be fine. That was the deal." But it was a lie. By the time he pulled into his driveway, he had already decided Samantha would not leave alive. Keyes lived with his girlfriend and his 10-year-old daughter in Anchorage. They were both home that night. So he pulled into the garage, shut the door, and left Samantha tied up in the truck while he went inside as if nothing had happened. He kissed his daughter goodnight. He chatted briefly with his girlfriend. He acted like any other man ending his workday. Only after they were asleep did he return to the garage to deal with Samantha. Keyes dragged Samantha from the truck and led her down into a small shed attached to his property. The space was cold, cramped, and pitch dark. He tied her securely, gagged her, and left her there overnight. The next morning, he went about his day normally. He made breakfast for his daughter. He checked emails. He even ran errands around town. All while Samantha remained bound in the shed, terrified and alone. That evening, Keyes returned to her. He allowed her to smoke a cigarette. He even engaged her in small talk, pretending once again that everything depended on the ransom. He assured her she would be released once the money was delivered. She believed me, Keyes said flatly. They always do. But by then, he had already planned her fate. Keyes revealed that on the night of February 2nd, after his daughter had gone to bed, he entered the shed one final time. He raped Samantha. Then, without hesitation, he strangled her until she stopped moving. He watched her body go limp, then remained there for several minutes to ensure she was truly gone. The room was silent as he recounted this detail, the agents struggling to keep their composure. But the horror didn't stop there. Keyes admitted that after killing Samantha, he poured himself a glass of wine, smoked his cigar, and calmly packed for a family vacation to New Orleans. The next morning, he flew out with his girlfriend and daughter as though nothing had happened. For over 2 weeks, while James and Dwayne were searching desperately for Samantha, while the Anchorage community held vigils and searched snowy fields, Israel Keyes was strolling through the French Quarter, laughing, eating, drinking, and sightseeing. Samantha's body remained locked inside his shed, frozen by Alaska's bitter February temperatures. When he returned from vacation, Keyes decided to continue his deception. He retrieved Samantha's frozen body, propped her up in a chair, and carefully applied makeup to her face. He braided her hair and even sewed her eyelids open with fishing line to make her appear alive. Then he placed a copy of the Anchorage Daily News, dated February 13th, in her lap. He took the photograph that would later be sent with the ransom note. She looked alive enough, he said coldly. That's all I needed. The agents sat in stunned silence. The proof-of-life photo, the one that had given James and Dwayne hope, had been a cruel fabrication. Samantha had already been dead for days when the picture was taken. When asked why he chose Samantha Koenig, Keyes shrugged. She was just there, he said. Right place, wrong time. That's all it ever is. He insisted he hadn't known her personally, hadn't stalked her as an individual. He simply saw an opportunity. A lone young woman working at night in an isolated kiosk. It was chance. Randomness. But investigators realized that randomness was Keyes' hallmark. Unlike many killers who fixated on specific victim types, Keyes thrived on unpredictability. He enjoyed knowing that his victims had no connection to him, that no one could have foreseen their fate. That's what made it fun, he admitted. By this point, the agents interviewing Keyes were grappling with something far larger than Samantha's case. The man sitting across from them wasn't just a kidnapper or a murderer. He was something worse, something rarer. He was organized. He was methodical. And he was admitting with casual confidence that Samantha was not his first victim. Keyes hinted at other murders. He spoke of projects he had carried out in different states. He mentioned kill kits buried across the country, containers filled with weapons, cash, and tools he had hidden years earlier, waiting for the day he would need them. When asked how many people he had killed, he smirked and said, "Less than a dozen." But investigators would later realize the true number was likely far higher. Keyes made the FBI an offer. He said he would confess to more murders, reveal locations, and provide closure to families, under certain conditions. First, he wanted a swift execution date. No lengthy trials, no endless appeals. He wanted to die within a year. Second, he demanded anonymity in the press. He didn't want his daughter to suffer the humiliation of knowing what he truly was. "Tell the world I'm a bank robber," he said. "Not this. Not a killer." The FBI agents sat stunned. A man negotiating his own death sentence was unusual enough. But the casual way he discussed multiple murders, as though they were bargaining chips, was almost more than they could bear. Israel Keyes was unlike most criminals the FBI had ever encountered. He wasn't driven by passion, revenge, or desperation. He killed because he wanted to. Because he could. His calm, calculated methods and the randomness of his choices made him nearly impossible to track. He admitted to murders across the United States, from Vermont to Washington, each one carried out with chilling precision. He buried kill kits years in advance, waiting for the perfect opportunity to use them. Samantha Koenig's case had pulled back the curtain on a man who might have otherwise continued his hidden rampage for years. Yet, even after his arrest, many questions remained unanswered. How many victims were there really? How many families would never know what happened to their loved ones? In December 2012, while awaiting trial in Alaska, Israel Keyes ended his own life inside his jail cell. He left behind a cryptic suicide note filled with rambling, disturbing imagery, but no real answers. To this day, the true scope of his crimes remains a haunting mystery. For Samantha's family, there was no justice, only grief. A bright young woman's life had been stolen, and an entire community was left shaken by the knowledge that true evil had been living quietly among them. If this story moved you, shocked you, or made you reflect on the darkness that sometimes hides in plain sight, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share it with others so more people can learn about this chilling case. And most importantly, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next story we bring to light. Stay safe, stay aware, and thank you for watching.